everyone! Thank you so much for watching another episode of the Weaviate Podcast. Today we're diving into our partnership between Weaviate and SAS. SAS is doing all sorts of amazing things with the SAS Retrieval Agent Manager and their partnership with Weaviate. I'm super excited to discuss these things further. And first, I'm super excited to welcome Weaviate co-founder Bob Van Lout. Bob, thank you so much for joining the podcast again.
Thanks for having me again on our own podcast.
Awesome. And I'm also super excited to welcome Saurabh Mishra from SAS. Saurabh, thanks so much for joining the podcast.
Hey everyone, nice to be here. Thanks, Connor and Bob.
Great.
Awesome. Bob, maybe you kick it off.
I'm always, Connor, you always have these great, exciting, you pick these things up. So I'm always curious, is there coming more, or is this, but so it's great to have you here. And it's just before we started, you said something super interesting, and I think that would be great to start there. Is you talked about what you're seeing around RAG and how those use cases are growing, and how we think about this at Weaviate. Is that we say first we had retrieval, then from retrieval we got to RAG, and then from RAG out of that we got to the agents.
Yeah.
So I would love to get your take, or maybe even SAS's take on how you see that development, how you see that happening with customers and with users. And then we can nicely go into, of course, what you've launched. But I would love to get your take also, maybe a little bit from a historic perspective
Yes.
on that.
Yeah, we can definitely be a little bit historic here, which in today's time just goes back to last year, because that's
exactly, yes.
That's when we started thinking about it. So we started thinking about RAG really first part of last year, where we started to kind of see that, obviously language models have been a craze at that time. Everybody was talking about, the weekly average number of users that ChatGPT has, and it's growing. But there was this challenge of, kind of adapting it to an enterprise scenario. And we started to kind of dig deeper into that. And, you quickly find out that the majority of enterprise data is unstructured. And for you to kind of unlock enterprise use cases, you got to be able to take general purpose tooling like the language models and kind of tailor them to a scenario where they can be applied to that enterprise data. And RAG just seemed like the right pattern. So that's kind of, when we first got serious about it, I mean, the aspect that we really liked is the fact that it is not tightly coupled to the model. So your model and data can change, which is really good, which is very practical, which is what happens. So we started look at that, and then our first foray into this space was looking at the embeddings. How do you generate embeddings? So everybody was talking about RAG, but then even before you get to the R of RAG, you need to do some preparation, right? I mean, your documents need to be prepared, and it just seemed to us at the time that not a lot of people were talking about the preparation, and that could be a time-consuming, messy task. So we were like, well, how about we tackle this? So we already have some capabilities within our portfolio that we use to operationalize complex AI pipelines, and we work with models that are obviously machine learning models that are trained with SAS, but we also use models that are trained elsewhere, right? I mean, we want to give flexibility to data scientists, and this engine that we use is really versatile, really performant. So the first thing that we started to do was that let's test if the embedding pipeline, the pipeline to create embedding from documents, can be manifested in this engine. So we did that, and that seemed to work really well. And we were talking about customer scenarios emerging. So late summer of last year, we had a major manufacturing customer of ours, approach us. And this is a large US based manufacturer, kind of forward leaning, and they already have predictive maintenance is a huge use case in manufacturing. These guys run massive assets, and keeping up with those assets and making sure they're not going down when not expected is a huge deal for them. So they already do the typical things, like they already use machine learning on fast moving sensor data, trying to anticipate anomalies and issues that might be happening. But what they were getting challenged is that this part is working fine. There's value getting created, but the output of this first part is a lot of alerts. right? And you have these alerts coming, and you're seeing that a fault code coming up, this part, and then the next question is like, well, how do I address it? And the answer to that question almost always is go to documents. You're talking about documents which are intense, dense, manuals, maintenance logs, and which would be like hundreds of them, fragmented across the company, just depending on the scale of this. So then we started to kind of really dive into that. Was kind of our inspiration, that what if we converge these two workflows? Like, the first part, which was like taking telemetry data, applying machine learning, and understanding what anomalies might be happening. And then once I have an anomaly, using that to kind of form a very sophisticated prompt that can then query across my knowledge base and come back with, here is an actionable plan for you, right? So this manufacturer's vision was to kind of eliminate the concept of fault codes and things like that, but just present a plan to their technician. So that kind of pushed us forward, and we were like, well, this is an important capability, and we were like, this whole part of preparing data needs to be simplified. So then we started the journey of kind of developing a no code user interface on top of it, which is what, and we continued to iterate with it. And we started to look at options where it can be deployed in cloud, can be deployed on prem. We started to, a lot of our customers are in healthcare and government space, and some of them are ours to just kind of putting data wherever, so they wanted to kind of maintain control of it. So we started to look at what is the right architecture. And vector databases are just fundamental to this, right? I mean, you guys obviously know this, but I just want to make sure that everybody else does. And we like, well, you know who are the leading vector databases, and that's how we kind of got connected and started. So that's the historical perspective.
Yeah, that's and just out of curiosity, so when when was for you, like really you personally, because I mean the whole deep learning wave is now happening for, what is it, like 12, 13 years or 14 years maybe, that it just all started again. When was the time that you were like, okay, now we're serious, this is like, now this is going to change everything? How long ago was that for you, just for you personally?
I would say personally that was beginning of last year, right? Because I was tracking the generative AI space, and I was, like I said, I was tracking like the likes of Chat GPT and Cloud getting prominence, and everybody talking about millions of users on it. And being in a company like SAS, I always have more of an enterprise B2B lens, and I always try to kind of map, like, this is primarily a B2C led revolution, right? And
Mm.
what would it take to kind of make a connection back to the B2B enterprise side? And I thought RAG was this like a really solid pattern that would try to bridge this gap. So that, I would say, beginning of last year was when I started to kind of really dive into this, and have had a little bit of a realization that look, for us to kind of take these powerful generative capabilities, but general purpose capabilities, and make sure that they can unlock enterprise use cases, will definitely require an ability for them to speak to the enterprise data. And people were talking about, well, I can train a language model, I can fine tune a language model. I mean, I don't know how many people are really seriously doing that. And then if people still ask us about fine tuned models, we have a lot of customer conversations going on, and they're like, well, what about fine tuned models? I'm like, if you're able to go ahead and fine tune a model, it is not going to preclude RAG from being applied. You can still, I mean, that could be a model, right? Because your fine tuned model is still is capturing a snapshot in time, right? Unless you are fine tuning it as fast as your data is changing, it is still going to get stale at some point in time. So RAG is your way to bring fresh data into it. So yeah, I would say beginning of last year was kind of that realization for me.
Yeah, and I have a question around that. So I have with so when I think about the enterprise, right, just not specifically for AI, but in general, and I'm gonna overly generalize, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are on this. So I always think, like, in the enterprise, there are people whose job it is to figure out why you can't do something. And then there's people whose job it is to do new stuff, right? Enable
Yeah,
stuff. So in the first group is like I don't know, might be risk manager or something,
yeah,
right? Where someone's like, oh, did we think about, the privacy, which by all means very important, but
yes,
but that group I wanna park over here right now, because that's like that I understand that, and I appreciate that it's very important that needs to happen, but I'm actually interested in that second group. How do you see or think that for that group that are building within the enterprise these AI applications or these reg applications, how might the challenge be different for them to do things than for, let's say, a startup on the complete other end of the spectrum building something AI native? And again, I understand that first group, that the startup doesn't have that first
yeah,
group, right? So, but everybody gets that, right? That's the thing. I'm
right,
really thinking about it from a building perspective. What are
right.
challenges you're seeing in the enterprise? Like, why is it sometimes difficult for people, or maybe it's not difficult at all? Maybe that's just not. Maybe you think like that you haven't seen that difficulties. I'm just curious. Why might it be difficult for those builders in the enterprise to get these AI applications off the ground?
Yeah, no, I mean, first of all, you're absolutely right. There are those two camps, and they exist in most large companies. So for the builders, I think I think the challenge was around. I think they would typically start with one of these frameworks. So start with LangChain or likes. They A lot of them were able to tinker fast, right? I mean, they were able to kind of put things together and like, look, here is something that I've created. But a lot of sponsorship in enterprise context comes from taking things to production and being able to kind of scale from there. And that was a challenge because these were somewhat flaky, if you will, right? Stuff that they put together, and by the time they get to a point where, okay, I have this thing working, you find out that there is a new version of the framework, and the framework has changed under you, right? So it's a little bit of, I think, a mix of that. Look, I need to be able to take this into production, and some of these frameworks were great at building POCs, but not necessarily production level software. You still require pretty serious engineering skills to then architect around it to be ready. I mean, that does also come back to, do you have enough bandwidth and skill set? And I think the fact that there were so many choices and frameworks changing all the time just kind of creates this challenge around, like, what is our tech stack that we are building with, right? So ultimately, that that becomes the challenge, that it was just not fast enough for them to take something from POC to production and then scale. I mean, which is not a new challenge. I mean, enterprises face this challenge all the time, but this was no different, right? So that's kind of what I at least what I observed. We also work with enterprises that are more innovative, more futuristic, and they have
Mm.
the right in-house capabilities, who have the experience of doing it. They were successful, but I can probably count them on my fingers on one hand.
Yeah,
They were just so far and few, but majority of them were just tripping over it.
yeah, yeah. And actually, you that's super interesting. And there was one thing in particular that I would like to double click on. You said something around the you said like the things that are changed because of AI, but you also mentioned the things that have not changed. And so, for example, I earlier today I had a conversation with somebody, and we were talking about like the database agents that we have within the query agents within Weaviate, and we talked about RBAC and like traditional role-based access control. That we said like that is something that's even for an agent that is just like unchanged, right? So people just get access to stuff or they don't, right? That is unchanged. I'm just curious, in everything that you see happening with these AI use cases, what are you actually surprised of that has not changed? Where you actually go like, well, actually, I was thinking this might have changed, but actually didn't. It's like it is very traditional still.
Well, I mean, I think it's probably a boring answer, but the challenge with data has not changed. All the data challenges are still there, because I think people still underestimate the amount of work it requires to get their data ready, and that has not changed. Um, I think the other thing that has not changed is the security overlay. That is such important thing, and I think that concern around it. And you talked about this first group and second group. I think there's people in the first group who are who are meant to be risk averse. I mean, that's their role, and they want to make sure that they have the right security infrastructure in place. So I think that has not changed, and that is leading to some interesting conversations, because a lot of common wisdom is that I need to talk to a language model, and you often think about, well, I need to get one from OpenAI, or I want to get one from Anthropic. That does require fundamentally for you to get your data to them, right? I mean, whatever goes in the prompt is being shipped to them, right? So
Mm.
there are regulated industries which are like, is this right? So that the security first mindset, is this something that we can security and privacy as well, right? I mean, it's not just about security. So that has not changed, right? I mean, there is that still that I think it's probably a good thing. It's a rigor. You could see that the second camp could be unhappy sometimes because it might slow them down. But I think the fact that master data management, just data cataloging, that continues to be a challenge. And people who have invested in this, are probably able to move faster than people who haven't, which is true for a lot of AI and general enterprise applications. And the the rigor that they put around security and privacy, I think, is still there.
Oh yeah, that is super interesting. And I was thinking, if we go to the reverse of that, right? So I think one of those great things I was recently I had it in a spreadsheet. So um, I was using a Google a spreadsheet. So
Mhm.
they now have this new function in the spreadsheet that's like equal AI, and one of the nice things was like I wanted to make a list of
Yeah,
something, but it was in that spreadsheet in free text format. So I basically in the prompt I said like pick one of those, I don't know, 5 options,
yeah,
and then based on these free text fields create that structured data for me. And I found that extremely powerful. The But it's of course interesting though that I noticed that here and there it made a mistake. So it was like it should have actually been that other option,
yeah,
but it was just too ambiguous, or not enough context, or not enough information. And because me as a human reading the text that was in that cell, I
right,
knew that it was wrong.
yeah,
So the how are we dealing with, or how are you dealing with, especially with enterprise customers, is that it feels to me that the value that we're getting from AI, especially when it comes to RAG, so when the data goes into the model and then something comes out, that the cost of that, and I don't mean cost in like dollar amount cost, but more
yeah,
the cost as in like uh, um, uh, um, uh, the thing that we have to give into is like accuracy. So we just need to
yeah.
accept the fact it just cannot be 100% accurate. That's just it. Yeah, we have to accept that. How big of a challenge do you see that in with your enterprise customers? Do you think that's more like an adoption cycle, or is it actually something that really needs to be resolved before people really can continue to implement these kind of solutions, especially for mission critical
Yeah,
applications?
it's a really, really good question, right? Because I think that's at some level kind of almost the unlock that needs to happen at some level, because there is, anytime you have a language model in the mix, there is some level of non-determinism that exists in your workflow, and you cannot completely get around it. So I think there's a couple of ways that we are trying to address. One is that, how do we make sure that, like, from our perspective, our capabilities, our products offer the right information so that the users can trust it, that it's reliable, right? So we, obviously, are, from our perspective, are investing in AI evals so that we can allow the users to generate their own evals and test with it. When every response that we create, we show citations, and we actually in our product we are able to kind of take those citations. So we see that, okay, here are the chunks that we pulled, and then we actually allow them to click on that chunk and it goes to that document. Like, and you actually scroll to that document, to that page, like this is the paragraph that you just saw there, right? So just at feature level, stuff like that is building some level of like trust. Like, this is okay. Here is how the response was generated. But I think there is still a fundamental level of like, what am I comfortable letting this do, right? So this is still a big question, right? So if I'm supporting a chat interface with a natural language, and then I think yes, I'm good. I am receiving the information and I'm deciding the next course of action. I mean, this is something like it's synthesizing, it's summarizing for me, and I can decide that, right? So that I think there is good adoption, right? I mean, chat based assistants are doing well, but then you start to think about agents, and one key characteristic of an agent has to be autonomy, and I think that's where the challenge lies. So what at least what we are saying is that I think there's two aspects, right? One is human in the loop agents. So especially for mission critical tasks, the agent will get to a certain point and then require a human to almost just say that yes, this makes sense, go ahead and do that. So that's one way that they are addressing. And the other way is that your agentic workflow could combine a more traditional, either a rule-based approach or a deterministic model, along with a RAG call or an LLM call, so that that, let's say, if we talk about, let's say, a mortgage application, somebody applies, so you're not passing that to the LLM to make that determination. So you will have more traditional, if I can call it, machine learning model that decides that. But in terms of, let's say, doing anything else, like creating the offer letter or whatever it is, you can obviously use large language models to do that. So I think that's kind of what we are saying, that keeping human in the loop for mission critical tasks, where even though it's maybe a stamp of approval, but the user provides that, or your agentic flows could include more traditional deterministic models, so that that those are proven, hardened, and I have tested them. Um, but I think that is. I mean, we're still on this journey. So I don't know exactly what patterns could unlock in future, but that's at least what we are seeing.
Yeah, and that's super insightful, and I think I'm also I just want to go a little bit more into the platform, actually, right? So because I think that people listening are going to be very curious about that too. So can you share a little bit what you already said a little bit around it with the tooling and the frameworks and people going to production? Can you share a little bit more about the design choices that you've made? And of course, and as Connor said in the beginning, we're super happy and proud to partner with all of you on this on this project. But I I would love to understand like the design choices you've made, what you think is important, especially from a SaaS perspective for the end customers. And of course, we also would always love to learn like what you like and enjoyed in building with our technology.
Yeah, sure. So we did try and be deliberate about our design choices. So there were like some keywords that I would throw and talk about. So we wanted to ensure that flexibility is one of our key design principles. So from the flexibility, I mean, it manifests in multiple forms. So one flexibility aspect is we will let you deploy this where your data is, right? So whether that's in your cloud, whether that's on-prem. So we wanted to make sure that we support that. Two, we in our pipelines, when we are, like I said, preparing data for RAG is a non-trivial task, and we wanted to make sure that was handled with flexibility in mind. So we allow you a choice of embedding models. So whether we bundle a set of embedding models, but we also will shortly allow you to bring your own embedding models. And from that perspective, we're completely being transparent. We're open to like bring your LLM, bring your vector database. Although we have first class integrations, but like if you want to choose a different language model provider or different vector database provider, we respect that choice, right? I mean, that is as because we are dealing with enterprises, and in many cases they already have a perspective that I have a partnership with XYZ. So you got to be able to work. So we like, yep, we will align to that. So that flexibility is an important principle. We really wanted to make sure that trustworthiness is a core element of this thing. Whether that's having a human kind of designing this workflow, whether that's the ability to design your own evals or have an LLM generate an eval, but you review it and then you see the scores. And we actually follow this kind of a concept of a champion challenger tournament type of a thing. So you can design multiple pipelines that convert your text data into embeddings. And then, using your evals or an LLM generated evals, we allow you to score them. And you see, like, at least, so the on its own, let's say a number might not make sense, but compared to each other, the numbers will tell you something. So there is some quantitative basis now for you to, like, okay, this pipeline using this embedding model and that chunking strategy does seem to perform better. So I am able to have some assurance that it's a good, reliable, trustworthy pipeline. So I will choose that. I talked about the citation. So trustworthiness was really important for us. The third thing I would say is the time to value aspect. So we saw people struggle with this thing. Like it took ages for them to get this thing up and running, and they were still look like there's some tape and straw kind of holding this together. So we wanted to make sure that the user interface was no code, and that's a challenging task because this thing is non-trivial. I mean, there are settings and configurations that are just part of the inherently this pipeline. So we wanted to kind of make sure that we allow you to make choices, but also have intelligent defaulting so that you can move fast where you need to. But having the ability to kind of go from documents to embeddings within minutes using our interface, there's a time to value aspect that we wanted to keep in mind. The last one I would say is performance, because some of these workloads could be compute intensive. So there is there's obviously a latency aspect to it. There's also, like, how much infrastructure do you utilize. So we have some architectural patterns that we utilize to gain acceleration even when you are running on an infrastructure that's not accelerated. So you may not have GPUs in the infrastructure, but we can still gain acceleration due to some design choices that we made. So I think those were like our top design principles, and I think we've tried to really closely align to them.
Yeah, that all of that makes a ton of sense, and that's by the way, that's actually another thing where you could actually say like that things haven't changed, right? So that time to
Yes.
value that is just unchanged, and I think one of the things that I always find so fascinating, for example, if we what we see, for example, with Weaviate is I'm fascinated by the developer experience of like the clients. So remind me again, which language are you guys using again for the integrations?
So we use, so all of the backend that we have is mostly Python.
Yeah,
Our front end is React, but that's especially in this product. We also use a lot of Go in our backend in just in broader product company.
yeah, but so Python is a great example because I think it's safe to say that Python is like the lingua franca of
Yes.
AI nowadays. And what I find so fascinating also, if we look at the Weaviate client, is like it's we call it the Weaviate client, but it's actually not a client anymore. It's like more like it's like a library almost. It doesn't feel like that you're interacting with database. In my mind, maybe you have a different point of view on this, but it's like where you had like back in the days, like with SQL, that you were like literally writing SQL in
Yeah.
the code, and then you had that new generation that of course came with NoSQL, um, where you were still connecting drivers and stuff to a
Yes.
database, and that's now kind of changing, that it feels almost like it's just a library. Oh yeah, and by the way, that offloads stuff to models and to a database. But
Yeah.
I find it fascinating how that the way that we write software is changing.
Yeah, I 100% agree, right? So, I mean, I think abstraction is, I think, the key theme here that has emerged in, I would say, the last few decades. So I started as a programmer, and I started programming in C, and I still have nightmares when I think about the memory management that I would almost always mess up, and then I find that there is some memory leak, and then you would need this some expert to be able to kind of review my code and find like, this is where you missed it. So I think we've made a lot of progress from that perspective. So yeah, I absolutely agree. I think the abstractions that have been created, you kind of have similar looking endpoints, similar looking libraries. I think they have gone a
Hmm.
long way in democratizing this. I mean, I think there is still. I mean, I still have people on the team who are like extreme C++ experts, and when there is time to design this like really really important mission critical performance stuff, you're going to do in C++. But a lot of the software doesn't necessarily need that, and the democratization and abstraction has really helped. And I want to go back to the previous question. You asked me about how I think we started working together, going to the design principles. I never answered that part of it. So when I think about, obviously flexibility was important to us, but we wanted to make sure that the flexibility also has its cost, right? If you make something too flexible, like, okay, I have to make choices for everything now, right? So we wanted to offer the flexibility, but we were very clear that we will have some first class integrations that we will start with, right? So we started to look at, obviously with the vector database options, and you guys were an extremely good fit for what we were trying to do, because obviously we wanted to offer a first class vector database experience, and you guys have that. And two, the ability to kind of spin up in the cloud, spin up on prem. I mean, that just totally aligned to what we were trying to do. And then I guess I have to give shout out to your team, Bob. I mean, you guys have been amazing, right? So working with
Thank you.
Joby and Erika, I mean, they're like a dream team. They're connected with my engineering team, and they talk to each other. They presented at conferences together. So I think it has really evolved, very organically in terms of like, so sometimes we've had these partnerships which are still quite abrupt here and there, but this has been, it's flowed really naturally. So I appreciate your team for that.
Oh, that's very kind of you to say, and I think it's a from everything I heard, it's actually it's mutual. So it's like it's a great partnership, and I think what's also so important is that us as a company in such a new space, we're also learning, right? So we need to have that feedback from people like what's working, what's not working, what do we need to improve, and those kind of things. And that was super valuable. So that we appreciate that a lot, actually, in the collaboration. So that's very kind of you to say. So what's next? What's the plan with the platform? What where are you guys going? What's the plan?
So the plan is to, we have a lot of, so we just went GA with this product that we call SAS Retrieval Agent Manager. And because we like an acronym for everything, we call it RAM. So we just went GA a couple of weeks back, and we have a lot of interest. I'm starting to see a fair bit of interest. So we primarily in the enterprise space, so large government entities, healthcare, life sciences, manufacturers, banks that have interest in this. So I think what's next is how do we convert this interest into some meaningful engagements that drive value for them and revenue for us. So that's really what's next. So really trying to kind of, because I think there's obviously a lot of noise. You could call it hype about it, but there are not a whole lot of patterns, or like, I have this enterprise use case where we have scaled this, right? So I think at some level everybody is still learning too, right? And that's fine. I mean, that's how it's meant to be. So we are also learning, finding that, look, people sometimes, I'm demoing and I find out that the kind of question I get is not about this fancy embedding model and look how easy it is to create, but it's about, okay, what is the cost to deploy this? Like, okay, let me go back and talk about that first. So we are starting to kind of think about more pragmatic, like what does an implementation look like? What is the total cost of ownership? What are the day two steps right after I have started? So really kind of going back to and that again, that has not changed, right? Kind of going back to our initial set of questions, that is still a key concern of like what's the total cost of ownership and things like that. So really what's next for us, I think are three things. One is like really focusing on converting these interest into pipelines that we can then engage on. two, I think we're trying to enable both internally and externally. So we are working with a partner ecosystem that allows us to kind of go fast. And three, this space is moving fast. So just because you just went GA does not mean that you can sit for 3 months and just see what happens, right? So we are also managing a very active roadmap in terms of like what's next on the roadmap. So there's some areas where we have a customer request like you ought to support this. I'm like, okay, that can be added to the roadmap. Some are a little bit more esoteric and they require research. So we are kicking off research streams for that. So I think that's kind of what next. There is still a fair bit of building left, but I think we have enough that can engage the market.
Yeah, and it's so this is also something you touch upon something super interesting, and it's like I was actually discussing this with somebody actually today. I believe that the term that's often used for it is like the curse of knowledge. It's like if you work in this space for so long, with so many things, you just there are all these assumptions you make about like did people think about this? Did people think about that? And do they understand that the blah, blah, blah? And then when you talk to people who are just excited about it, that as you mentioned, that they just ask really basic questions, right? So it's like and that's a uh, and I sometimes I find it so hard, but I'm curious if you have thoughts on this because I do think it's fair to say that it's still early in the sense of like building with AI, but sometimes I feel it's even way more early than we might think, right? So it's like a in the early days of the web or something, right? Where um, that we sometimes think that with AI we're actually already in the time that Amazon.com is released to
Yeah.
make that analogy, but that actually it's even still earlier that we're still like in the pre Google days to stay in that analogy.
Yes.
I'm just curious how you what do you think about that? How in if you try to compare that, for example, with the early internet or those kind of things, how where do you think we are?
So I think we are early. I would say that we are early in the like I have to really scratch my memory for the early internet days. But there was that early internet time when I remember somebody you remember the bookstores that used to be there and that
Yeah.
started to get replaced with the online stuff. So I think at that time nobody could project, right? I mean it was still somewhat of an organic displacement that was starting to happen and nobody could project that how disruptive this could become, right? I mean there were industries that were wiped out, right? I mean there were like bookstores that just closed forever. We might be just around that time, right? Because we don't know how disruptive this can be and what job functions would fundamentally change, what companies may no longer exist, what companies may actually prosper and thrive. So I think we might be even at that early stage. And I think I'll actually go one extent beyond that. And what is challenging is that so when that was happening, that was the only thing that was happening in that space. But here, what's the problem is that the the consumer adoption has happened quite fast, right? Again, the B2C aspect. So you have these enterprise companies and you have these executives that are under pressure right now. Like, what's my AI strategy? What am I doing with agents? How many agents do I have deployed? Right. So it has become a little bit of like, I need to do something about it as a technology enterprise leader, as opposed to like again just going back to the fundamentals. Where do I need it, what workflows can be accelerated, where it is a fit, where it is not. So sometimes I think that is kind of just accelerating this this rush to get on the bandwagon, which is making this early even look even harder, right? The fact that they're missing that it is early and sometimes it will take time to get to the right patterns. But because that there is again 700 million weekly average users that ChatGPT has, like how do I get some of that goodness in my enterprise use cases? So I think we are pretty early from the perspective of how much disruption can happen, but it is quite challenging given the massive adoption that has happened in the B2C space. And it is also challenging because some of the employees in these companies are using that, right? I mean, productivity tools are just there, right? So if, I mean, obviously most of us are using that, and for them to be not able to just connect the dot, like, how can this unlock my business use case is a pain point, right? And that is making this early even more challenging.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, but this is also something that's not new for AI. Like if we look, for example, back to the personal computer, it was not the computers that people were working using at work that they wanted to use at home. It was the stuff that they were using at home that they wanted to use at work.
Yes,
And that's kind of what we see now with AI as well. It's not the fancy, models that are running somewhere and they're like, oh, it would be nice if we could do that at home. No. It's
quite
like, hey, that ease of use of using the general purpose models at home, that they want to bring that to their to their work. And that is
exactly.
I think that's a very good signal that we see that's happening. This is, oh man, this has been fascinating. So last but not least, if people listening are curious and maybe working in the enterprise and they go like, hey, we want to start to tinker around with this new SaaS platform, where do they go? How do they reach out to you?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I think there's many ways to connect with us. I mean, sas.com/ram is the starting point. It's rather simple. sas.com/ram gets you started in terms of what the product is about. I am on LinkedIn, so you can look me up, Saurabh Mishra SAS. I think there's only one with those combinations. So you can find me pretty easily there if somebody is interested, and I'm always happy to connect and talk about what we can do. Like I said, I mean, I think there's still a lot of learning to do. So we are in it together, and we're uncovering new patterns and new questions every day. And I think this is, I mean, there's we talk about challenges and all of that, but this is also just like super interesting time. This is like one of the best times to build, right? I mean, if you
Yes.
think about it. So I'm really thrilled with what we have built so far. And like we talked about, that the space moves fast, so we cannot be like sitting on this. So we are building already the next layer of where this goes. And really, really grateful for the partnership that we have.
Fantastic. Well, thanks. Oh man, wasn't this great, Connor?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks so much, Saurabh. This was great. We love to have these conversations. Which number are we in when it comes to podcasts now, Connor? Which number will this be?
129.
129
129.
podcasts. Yes,
Wow, you guys have been
yes,
cranking.
yes. We have had builders, scientists, startups, enterprises. You name it. It's like and it's like and Connor has run the podcast for so long already. It's like it's fantastic, and it was absolutely amazing that I could join you, Saurabh, to talk about the great stuff you're building on at SAS with RAM. So that's great.
Yes, no, likewise. I appreciate the opportunity, and I think we are looking to kind of get some customer wins now. And our goal is to kind of make sure that we're able to connect the dots. So working with your team, trying to make sure that we're able to kind of bring them in, provide the appropriate support that the customers need. Kind of just going back to still new space, still new technologies at some level. So I think there's a lot of room for us to kind of continue to partner in the future.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. This was
Thanks.
great.
Yes, no, I enjoyed it. Thank you for the opportunity, and have a good one.